A queen can be sitting on the comb, alive and healthy, and the colony can still slow its brood production to a crawl. This is one of the most misread signals in beekeeping. A queen that is present, that is viable, but that has measurably reduced her egg-laying rate. The instinct for most beekeepers is to blame the queen, to suspect failure, to begin the process of replacement. But the biology tells a different story, and understanding that story is the difference between a stable apiary and a cycle of unnecessary requeening. Have you experienced this in your own hives? If so, stay through this breakdown. It may reshape how you read your colonies. If this kind of biology-first content is valuable to you, a like helps others find it. The scene inside a hive showing reduced laying is deceptive. There are bees on the frames. There is a queen moving among them. There may even be scattered brood, a few capped cells here, a small patch of larvae there, but the pattern is off. Instead of tight, concentric ovals of brood spreading across multiple frames, there are gaps, empty cells sitting beside polished ones. What appears to be a failing queen is, in many cases, a colony that has downregulated its own reproductive output. The queen has not lost her capacity. The colony has constrained it. Strong queen, weak expansion, that is the contradiction. To understand why, it is necessary to look at the chemical architecture of the hive. A mated queen produces a suite of pheromones, the most significant being queen mandibular pheromone, or QMP, that serve as the primary signal to workers that the colony is queen-right. QMP is not a single compound. It is a blend of at least 5 major components, including 9-ODA and 9-HDA, that workers detect through direct contact and through the movement of retinue bees who spread these chemicals across the comb surface. When QMP levels are strong and distributed evenly, workers behave as though reproductive order is intact. They suppress their own ovarian development. They build worker comb. They prepare cells for the queen to lay in. But here is the critical detail that most beekeepers never consider. The queen's pheromone signal is not an instruction to produce brood. It is a signal that the colony is queen-right. The actual rate of egg-laying depends on an entirely separate set of conditions, and this is where the breakdown begins. What most beekeepers misunderstand is this: a queen does not autonomously decide how many eggs to lay each day. She is not a machine running at a fixed output. Her laying rate is a response, a biological negotiation between her capacity and the colony's preparation. For a queen to lay an egg, a worker must first prepare a cell. That means cleaning it, polishing it, and inspecting it. Only when a cell meets specific standards will the queen deposit an egg. If workers are not preparing cells at a sufficient rate, the queen's laying slows, not because she has failed, but because the infrastructure has not been built. If you value biology-based beekeeping, consider subscribing. This is where the concept of colony-level regulation becomes essential. The colony does not simply react to the queen. It actively modulates brood production based on a web of internal feedback signals. Nutrition is one of the most powerful of these signals. When incoming nectar and pollen are abundant, nurse bees produce royal jelly at high volume. That jelly feeds larvae, but it also signals to the colony that resources are sufficient for expansion. When forage drops, due to weather, seasonal dearth, or landscape change, nurse bees reduce jelly output. Fewer cells are prepared. The queen's laying rate falls. The brood nest contracts. None of this requires a failing queen. It requires only a colony reading its environment and adjusting accordingly. More bees, less brood. Not because something is broken, because something is working. The historical record supports this understanding. Beekeepers working in Northern Europe during the late 19th century documented seasonal laying pauses that had nothing to do with queen viability. In regions with a sharp June dearth, a gap between spring blossom and summer flows, colonies would reduce brood production by as much as 40% for 2 to 3 weeks, then resume normal laying once linden or clover began to yield. These beekeepers did not rush to requeen. They recognized the pattern as a colony-level response to forage availability. Lorenzo Langstroth himself noted that queen productivity was inseparable from the conditions surrounding her, observing that queens placed into strong, well-fed colonies immediately increased their output, while the same queens in weak colonies laid at reduced rates. The queen had not changed. The support system had. There is a further layer to this regulation that involves worker population dynamics. A queen's laying rate is partly governed by the ratio of nurse bees to open brood. When that ratio is high, many nurses per larva, the colony can sustain rapid expansion. When the ratio drops, either because nurse bee populations have declined or because existing brood demand has outpaced the workforce, the colony throttles back. This is not a conscious decision. It is an emergent property of thousands of individual bees responding to local cues, the availability of jelly, the warmth of the brood nest, the density of bees on the comb face. Each nurse bee operates within a narrow window of stimulus and response. But the aggregate effect is a regulated system that adjusts laying rate to match colony capacity. Temperature plays a direct role as well. The brood nest must be maintained within a narrow range, roughly 93 to 96 degrees Fahrenheit, for eggs and larvae to develop normally. In early spring or during cool spells, maintaining that temperature across a wide brood area demands significant metabolic energy from worker bees. If the cluster is too small or too nutritionally depleted to heat a large brood area, the colony restricts laying to a smaller zone. The queen may be physiologically capable of laying 1,500 eggs a day, but if the colony can only thermoregulate a space sufficient for 500, that is the effective output. The queen adjusts. She does not override. She responds. This is the narrow decision window that catches so many beekeepers off guard. A beekeeper inspects in mid-April. I sees a queen with a reduced brood pattern and concludes she is failing. But the inspection is happening during a cool snap. Night temperatures have dropped into the low 40s. The cluster has contracted. The foragers are grounded. Pollen intake is minimal. Under those conditions, reduced laying is not a sign of failure. It is a sign of functional colony regulation. The danger comes from the beekeeper's response. Replacing that queen introduces weeks of disruption. The new queen must be accepted, must begin laying, must build her pheromone presence. During that transition, the colony loses the very regulatory stability it was trying to maintain. So how does a beekeeper distinguish between genuine queen failure and colony-regulated laying reduction? The answer lies in pattern, not volume. A failing queen produces a recognizable signature, scattered brood with many empty cells interspersed among capped cells, multiple eggs in single cells, a drone brood in worker cells, or a shift toward predominantly drone production. These are signs that the queen's spermatheca is depleted, that her egg-laying mechanism is physically impaired, or that she has become a drone layer. Colony-regulated reduction looks different. The brood that is present is solid and well organized, just smaller in area. Larvae are healthy. Capped brood is uniform. The pattern is tight but contracted. The queen is often visible, moving calmly, attended by a retinue. Her body condition is normal. There is no sign of supersedure cells, which the colony would begin building if it detected true queen decline through shifts in pheromone composition. The practical assessment follows a clear sequence. First, evaluate the brood pattern itself. Is it tight and concentric, even if reduced in area? If yes, the queen is almost certainly viable. Second, check food stores. Are there at least 2 frames of pollen and adequate honey reserves within the brood box? If stores are low, the colony may be throttling brood production in response to resource scarcity. Third, assess population density. Are there enough bees to cover the brood frames? A colony with 3 frames of bees trying to maintain 5 frames of brood is under thermoregulatory stress. Fourth, consider the calendar. Early spring and midsummer dearth periods are the most common windows for colony-regulated laying reduction. A brood check during these periods demands more patience and less intervention than one during a strong nectar flow. If the assessment confirms that the queen is viable but laying is suppressed, the response is not replacement, it is support. Supplemental feeding with 1-to-1 sugar syrup can simulate an incoming nectar flow, triggering workers to resume cell preparation. Pollen supplements or pollen patties placed directly above the brood nest can stimulate nurse bee jelly production, which in turn supports expanded brood rearing. In some cases, simply consolidating the brood nest, moving frames closer together, and reducing the total hive volume with a follower board or by removing empty frames can help the cluster maintain brood nest temperature more efficiently, freeing energy for brood expansion rather than thermoregulation. The timing of intervention matters critically. Feeding a colony during a strong nectar flow is unnecessary and can disrupt natural foraging incentives. Feeding during a genuine dearth, when the colony has already begun contracting, provides the signal that resources are available and expansion is safe. The window is typically narrow, a week to 10 days at the onset of dearth behavior, before the colony has fully committed to contraction. Intervening too late means the colony has already reduced its nurse bee population, and recovery will be slower even with supplemental feeding. Intervening too early before the colony has actually entered a resource deficit wastes syrup and can contribute to issues like robbing behavior from neighboring colonies. There is one additional scenario that deserves attention: the role of congestion in suppressing queen laying. In a hive where frames are packed with honey and pollen, often called a honey-bound condition, the queen literally runs out of space to lay. Every cell that could hold an egg is already occupied by stored resources. This is particularly common in spring, when strong early flows fill the brood box before the beekeeper has added supers. The queen is healthy, her pheromones are strong, workers are attentive. But there is no room. The solution is straightforward: add drawn comb or foundation above the brood nest, or extract frames of capped honey to open space. In historical practice, this was often managed by spreading the brood nest, a technique where empty drawn comb is placed between frames of brood, giving the queen immediate access to prepared cells. This practice requires caution. Spreading frames too aggressively in cool weather can chill brood at the margins. The general guideline is to never place an empty frame more than one position away from the center of the existing brood nest, and only when daytime temperatures are reliably above 60 degrees Fahrenheit. The lesson embedded in all of this is not complicated, but it requires a shift in perspective. The queen is not a standalone unit of production. She is a component in a regulated system. Her laying rate is an output of that system, not an input. When laying slows, the first question should never be whether the queen has failed. The first question should be, what conditions have changed around her? Nutrition, temperature, space, worker population, a seasonal forage. These are the variables that govern brood expansion. The queen responds to them. She does not override them. Beekeepers who internalize this principle make fewer unnecessary queen replacements. They waste less time and fewer resources chasing a problem that does not exist. They learn to read contraction not as crisis, but as regulation, and they learn to intervene, when intervention is warranted, by addressing the cause rather than replacing the symptom. The colony is not broken when the queen slows down. In most cases, the colony is doing exactly what it evolved to do, matching its reproductive investment to its capacity and its environment. The beekeeper's task is not to force expansion. It is to understand the signal, assess the conditions, and respond, or not, with precision. If this breakdown was useful, leave a comment with your experience. Subscribe for more historically grounded beekeeping insights.